Hi, it's Dot from dotstrot.com. And with Thanksgiving just days away, I thought I'd go ahead and whip up a low carb pumpkin pie. And the ingredients we're going to use today are going to be 4 eggs, pumpkin, heavy cream. I've got some pecans, which I'm going to use for the crust, butter, a sugar substitute. It still is a sweetener, but it's a low carb sweetener. I have cinnamon, salt, pumpkin spice, and a hazelnut flour. Now, where I got the recipe from, this isn't mine. I just made one little switch to the recipe, but I got it from this book, which is one of the cookbooks I do use quite a lot or refer to for ideas. And it's by George Stella. He's a chef. He used to have a show actually on the Food Network, which was a low carb cooking show. And he used to weigh a lot, and he lost all the weight eating low carb. And this is the complete low carb cookbook. It's a really good book, lots of really cool ideas, especially if you're starting out with low carb or just looking for different recipes you want to try. So it's something you might want to think about. And I'll just put a link below too if you're interested. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to start on the crust. Now this pie has 3 components to it. There's a crust, there's the actual filling, which is the pumpkin pie piece of it, and then there's a crunchy topping that goes on top of the pie. I haven't tried this recipe with the crunchy topping yet, and so this will be my first time doing that, so we'll see how that goes. But we're going to start with the crust, and what we're going to do is start chopping up some pecans. So what we're going to do is head over to my coffee station, may seem odd, but it really isn't. I'll show you a little shortcut rather than just chopping it up with a knife. So the recipe calls for a half a cup of chopped nuts, and it's not a half a cup of pecans that you cut in half. It's a half a cup of actual chopped nuts. So rather than just chopping and chopping and chopping on your cutting board, which you certainly can do, one of the things that I started doing was I got a second coffee grinder that I only use for nuts, herbs, and spices. So when I want to make some of my own stuff, and it's reasonable, meaning like a half a cup of nuts that I need, then I'll just go ahead and use it in my coffee grinder. Now, the one thing you want to be careful about is you do want to just pulse it. You want to make sure you can actually see the nuts inside, because I'm not making that many of them. I'm not requiring that many nuts. I'm just having a few in there because it's real easy when you're doing this to make a nut butter real quickly, and you don't want to do that. I'm chopping up nuts, and as you can see, I've already chopped up the bulk of them. I just need a little bit more, and most of the nuts are either it's a powder like you would have like a flour, or it's crunchy. I've got some nuggets in there, and I sort of like that mix with this particular type of crust. So I'm going to go ahead and start pulsing the nuts that I have in here. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to go ahead, unplug that, and then I just take a spoon. You see it's a little fine little powder or some crunchy nuts in there. And let's just go ahead and start pouring. It's one way you can do this. Like I said, I use this for herbs. I use it for spices. When I'm using whole spices like cloves or even nutmeg, I'll grind them up in here. I wouldn't necessarily recommend a nut butter, but it's real easy to make a nut butter. I did that accidentally with macadamia nuts. That was the first thing, was making chopped up macadamia nuts to crust a fish with. And I sort of kept my finger on the button, and it just made a liquid. Still used it, but nonetheless, you don't really want to do that. So anyway, what we're going to do is head on over back to the workstation, and I'm going to start making the crust. I have half a cup of a sugar substitute, which is low carb. I'm going to go ahead and add in all of my pecans, my diced up pecans. So we're going to add them in. So it's about like I said, about a half a cup of pecans. I'm going to add in about just a pinch of sea salt. So a pinch, for those of you who aren't sure what a pinch is, about 1/8 of a teaspoon. And then I'm going to measure it out though, because I don't trust my pinch. I like to pinch a lot, I notice. I'm adding in some ground cinnamon. And what you do with the butter, to make your crust, you're just going to go ahead and add in about 2 tablespoons of melted butter. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay. Good. Now what I'm just going to do is start mixing everything up. it's just starting to absorb all the butter within it. You shouldn't see any white from your sweetener. There we go. That looks good. So what I'm going to do is go ahead. I have a 10-inch ceramic pie pan. It's a deep dish pie pan, but 10 inches is what I'm going to use. And what I'm going to do is just start pouring all of this in here. Go ahead and get that off of there. And then you're going to start using your hands. You want to spread it out, and you're just going to start patting it on the bottom. I have a puppy who's dreaming right now. I hear her making noises. But anyway, so you're just going to spread it out evenly. Don't go up the sides. You just want it on the bottom. Yeah. So that's my crust. It's not a complete crust, obviously, like you see with the pie. A normal, a very fattening pie, I guess you could say, where you have the crust going up the sides and over for more of a dough. But here, we're just going to do this at the bottom. And then this is going to go into the oven at 350 degrees for about 5 minutes. You want that to start cooking. And then when I put this in the oven, we'll come back over, after I put that in the oven, we'll come back here and I'll start making the filling. All right, my pie crust is in the oven. It's going to be out or ready to go shortly. So I'm going to start making the pie filling. So what I've got here is 4 eggs. I'm going to add in 3 quarter cups of sweetener. 1, 2. Always at the end. 3. Perfect. Now I'm going to add in my pumpkin, my pumpkin pie spice, and 1.5 or 1.25 cups of heavy cream. Remember, this is a low-carb recipe, so I don't go for the half and half stuff or the light cream stuff. You always want as much fat, healthy fat, as possible, especially when it comes to dairy. But what I'm going to do now is just start mixing this. And I'm just doing this to start moving things together. Eventually, I'm probably going to move to my whisk. I got my whisk out, but I like using my little spoon. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my whisk. I want it to really break up that pumpkin. So here we go. You want to whisk all your ingredients together. And it'll start taking that light pumpkin color if you've ever made the custard before. The nice thing about this recipe, though, is you can do this without the crust and without the topping, too. And you can make it even lower carb if you're just using the filling. And I've done that before and made, basically, it's a custard you're making, essentially. And I just put them in small ramekins and put them in the oven and cook them. And they just sit in the fridge for at least a week, and you can just sort of have a little dessert if you want, or if you're having some friends over, just something, a nice light dessert instead of something heavy. Now, the nice thing about my batter bowl that I love is I can make sure I got everything off the bottom. If it's more a solid color of the bowl, it's hard to tell, but everything is mixed. So what we're going to do is when the oven is when my timer goes off in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pour this on top of the crust that I have in my pie pan. So I'm going to go ahead and check my oven, see where I'm at with my crust. I'll be right back. All right, I got my crust out of the oven. It's sitting over here. I turned on my oven from 350 up to 425 because the pie is going to go in there with my crunchy topping on top for about 15 minutes at that high temperature before I bring it back down to 350. So to make my topping, I've got about 1/4 cup of my sugar substitute. I have my hazelnut flour, and I'm using hazelnut. The recipe, this is the one deviation. The recipe does call for just almond flour, and that's perfectly fine. I just didn't have any, and I have some hazelnut flour I just wanted to use up, so I'm just using that, but you can certainly use almond flour if you choose to. I'm adding in softened butter, about 3 tablespoons, and I'm going to be adding in a half, not all of that cinnamon, but just half a teaspoon of cinnamon with this recipe, with the topping. My oven is at 425. Hooray. Just use a fork. You're going to start mixing everything together to combine. You want it's going to be like clumpy with that butter, so you're just breaking it apart. All that butter off of there. You're going to work it until it's sort of like almost fine, or not fine, but maybe pea-sized clumps. That's what you want. And you're going to spread that all over, so you really have to just work the butter through. Just start at this point, just start fluffing it. All right, I have my topping, my crunchy topping, or what will turn into a crunchy topping, all set up. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and pour the pumpkin on top of the crust. This is why you need that deep pie crust pan, that deep pan, a 10-inch, because it really does fit a 10-inch. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and just put the crunchy topping on top. And you don't have to use it all if you don't want to. I'm not sure I am. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do now is go ahead and I'm going to put it in my oven for about 15 minutes at a high temperature. And again, that's to sort of get this a little more crunchy, essentially on top. And then I'm going to drop the temperature down to about 350, and I'll cook it for about 50 minutes after that. Now, again, I've mentioned this before in some of the videos I've made, but having a timer set up on your phone so you can keep track of this, it is sort of 3 moving pieces between the crust, the crunchy topping, and the actual pie itself. And this is a great way to keep track of all of it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pie in, set my timer for 15 minutes at 425, and then we'll come back actually when the pie is actually completely done and ready to come out of the oven. And don't worry about rewatching a video over and over again. I'll have all the directions below the video. So, but right now I got to get this sucker in the oven. All right, pie is out of the oven. It looks beautiful. It smells phenomenal. My cameraman had stepped out for a few minutes as the pie was cooking. And when he came back in after about 20 minutes back into the house, he was overwhelmed by just a wonderful smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. So it's obviously the cinnamon and the pumpkin spice really kicked into high gear when you're cooking, and my whole house smells absolutely wonderful. I did end up after right before putting it into the oven, I ended up using all of the topping that I was making. And that was at the request of my cameraman. He really, really wanted me to go ahead and put it all on. So I did. And it looks wonderful. I'm glad he talked me into it. So you see the crunchiness on top, which is just the hazelnut flour combined with a little bit of cinnamon and sweetener, and butter, and it just looks absolutely delicious. I can't wait to dive in. It's got to cool for about an hour now, so I'm just going to leave it up on the stove top to cool. Pumpkin pie this Thanksgiving, so it'll be a lot more healthier than normal. And you don't have to have the strudel on top, or the streusel on top if you don't want it. And that'll cut down the carb also. So this pie, depending on the type of canned pumpkin that you use, you want pumpkin that has absolutely no sugar in it. You don't want a pumpkin pie filling because that's loaded with sugar. But depending on the type of canned pumpkin you use, this pie is about 8 servings roughly, and you're looking at probably about 3.5 carbs roughly per net carbs per serving. And if you're curious about serving size, it should serve about 8. But if you want to make sure you get the right amount or don't go over, always one of the tricks I use is sort of I'm not going to touch the pie pan. It's a little bit too hot right now to touch, but just use your fingers like this, and that sort of is a slice of pie for you. If you like what you see, then go ahead, give it a good old thumbs up, and also hit subscribe. And if you have a dessert that you are planning to make this Thanksgiving that is low in carbs, go ahead and put it in the comments and let people know what exactly you're making, and share your recipes. And till next time, I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you later.